The first place that I'd like to start as we delve into this particular subject is who's affected and how are they affected? These are always the primary questions on everybody's mind when they contact us regarding an electronic harassment case. And there are some explanations that we do have. Unfortunately, we're not really sure how it is that people who are targeted are targeted. That's kind of the $100,000 question that thankfully people much smarter than myself are still researching. So hopefully we'll have some answers on that soon. As far as who is affected, let's start there. When it comes to electronic harassment, this is an equal opportunity problem. It basically affects people of all income levels, all social levels. It does not seem to be restricted to color, creed, race, religion, anything. It crosses all barriers, basically, of social strata and interaction strata. So the question becomes, how is this happening for people? Who is affected? We see a lot of military vets, former drug addicts and drug abusers. We see a lot of people who live near large power stations or near large radio towers who report this phenomena almost spontaneously in a lot of cases. It's not there one day and then suddenly one day it is. A good way to approach this is through what a colleague of mine who I've contacted several times and spoken with is a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall. He's a medical doctor who's retired now, but he's based out of Houston, Texas. And Dr. Hall approaches this phenomenon almost like an allergy. He prefers to call it electromagnetic hypersensitivity. It's a very, very good idea to realize that this very much is a real phenomenon as well. There does seem to be a certain subset of the population that is extremely sensitive to microwaves, electromagnetic fields, geomagnetic anomalies of all kinds. And they seem to feel it more than the rest of us do. Now, I myself am not what you would consider a very sensitive person. You can just ask every single girlfriend I've ever had. But as an investigator, I have been to areas where these dispersions are throwing out some really high energy and really high frequencies. And I have experienced some of the phenomena that people call to report to us in limited cases for limited amounts of time. It's hard to be skeptical once you've actually heard, seen, or felt it yourself. And that's why we decided to make this series of videos. I wanted to speak to all of you directly so that hopefully I can save you some time and myself some time when you do reach out to ask us questions about this or to consult with us about a case that you may have. Now, as to how this is affecting people, these are all very good questions, but there is a clue in what Dr. John Hall shared with me about how it affects people physically. To start with, a microwave transmission is going to affect mammals, especially, in a very detrimental way. The first thing that a microwave transmission does is affect the frontal lobe of the brain. Now, this is the area of the brain that controls a lot of different things about personality, okay? Choices that we make, moods that we feel, decision making, basically happiness, joy, anger, sadness, depression. All of these things stem from the frontal lobe of the brain. If it is being affected, it can cause a lot of different neurological dysfunctions. It can cause auditory hallucinations, in some cases visual hallucinations. There are some common themes when people call to report to me about things that they're hearing that do fit a criteria pattern that shows that there is a common factor through all of these cases. Even though circumstances differ, it does always seem to follow a set pattern of escalation. Now, that escalation seems to serve to, basically divide and conquer. It isolates the individual from family, from friends, from their spouses, sometimes from their job, sometimes from people they've known their entire lives. It can change their personalities from people who are normally very happy and very stable to irrational, angry, sometimes extremely depressed, sometimes completely apathetic, and in a few isolated cases, we've even seen a couple of people who bordered on or actually committed suicide. And I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that these dispersions and what was affecting them played a very large part in that. Now, Dr. Hall, who I mentioned earlier, has approached it basically as like the approach of an allergy. Okay, he has approached it with ways to try and medically treat it. Now, in some cases, he's been successful, and others not at all. That actually sounds familiar because we have kind of the same problem. But we have been able to effectively, by going through some of the things that he did explain to me, I have been able to modify the investigations to at least account for the fact that there may be people who do have an allergy to industrial Wi-Fi systems, to radio cell towers, to former number stations that are now operating as radio beacons. These things are pulsing out a microwave signal that is most definitively sky-based. I've tracked it myself to 5 different towers separated by thousands of miles all over the country, and it's the same exact frequency that's coming down. So the question, now that we have a couple of answers, of course, that spawns 30 more questions. How is this transmission being sent? Why is it only affecting a certain subset of the population? Is it something that affects people's DNA? Is it affecting their brain pattern? Is it a certain EEG level that, the EEG frequency that is susceptible to it? We're not really sure, to be honest with you. Every single time that we do get an answer, we get a lot more questions, unfortunately. But this is something that I think I'm going to be studying more than likely for the rest of my life, because it's a subject that is affecting so many people now that it's truly becoming ridiculous. Now, there are some people who are looking for answers. Some of them have power, but most of them do not. Most of them are just ordinary schlubs like you or me. And we don't really have any clout or pull, and we certainly don't have the money of, say, a Donald Trump to be able to dig into it as deep as we would like. But with sharing research with other researchers and coordinating with other researchers over the last few years has given us a real leg up as far as being able to effectively block these problems, block these transmissions, and at least get people back to some modicum of normal life. I have several thousand clients all over the country who, when they first called us, they were essentially basket cases. They were on the verge of losing their jobs, their families, their husbands or their wives. All of their friends had retreated from them. Their families no longer spoke to them. They were isolated and scared and alone, and they didn't know what to do. Going at it in a scientific and objective fashion, we were able to find several methods that were extremely effective in blocking these transmissions and in helping these people not just to feel better mentally, but to start to feel better physically. There are more than a few of them that do actually feel physical pain when these transmissions happen or when the activity on it amps up. And for that reason, I started consulting MDs, electrical engineers, satellite communications guys, former vets from the Navy and the Air Force who had worked with things like emitters and modulators and different devices that are microwave based that can project and receive transmission at the same time. These are all devices that are used primarily by the military, but law enforcement uses them as well. Federal agencies have used them for surveillance on human traffickers, gun runners, large drug dealers, large shipments, things like that. And they do actually exist. They are actually real. But it's not a simple thing to operate one of these things. It takes a very specialized skill set, and they are not cheap. Primarily, they're made by defense contractors, Raytheon being the largest in the country that I know of. They produce everything from the large emitters known as crowd guns that go on the backs of trucks to disperse crowds during food riots or large urban problems, all the way down to handhelds that can be used by law enforcement to actually surveil a structure within a half a mile with a small handheld device that is portable. All of these devices, though, share the same fact that they are microwave based, and the fact that this transmission has affected people in such a way says to me that since we didn't have it 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, this would be the impetus for something new that we've never seen before. As such, unfortunately, we are kind of making it up as we go along in a certain way. It's not, it's not that there's a fallacy involved here, but there is the fact that we have so many different theories to check out that it does take, unfortunately, a lot of time to figure out what works and what doesn't. It can be a very piecemeal process. So there's no overnight cure. There's no, as far as I know, there is no cure. I've only come across a few people, a very small percentage of people that I've talked to over the years, where the activity seems to have ceased, or they seem to have developed a tolerance to it. But those are very few and far between, no more than 24 out of, say, 5,000 or so. Why that is a complete mystery to us still. That's something that, thankfully, again, people much smarter than myself are researching. But one thing that we can definitely do is recommend to people how to avoid these things, how to block them out of their lives and block them out of their homes so that they and their children and their pets are not affected by it. In that vein, I do want to take, in the next video, some time to explain some of the different feelings and some of the different symptoms that people do develop when you are exposed to this. Basically, it will help you to narrow down if this is your problem. Because I get a lot of people who call me, and it seems almost as if they've been sitting on WebMD and they're self-diagnosing. Sometimes that can help, but most of the time it just gets in the way. The best way to go at it is to just call us and objectively tell us what's going on. The important thing too, also, is to remain calm, because no matter the more emotional you get, the more that people are going to judge you to be unstable. Okay, and that's just a fact. Especially if you're contacting law enforcement or medical personnel, try to speak to them in an objective manner, as emotionless as possible. Otherwise, as has happened in hundreds of cases of people I've talked to, you may be set up for what's called a 5150, which is an involuntary observation in a mental health facility. And believe me, I know myself, having done so many of these cases, that's not going to help you. They may calm you down, give you a sedative or put you on Thorazine, but at the same time, you're still going to be feeling what you're feeling. So that's not really going to help the situation. So what we need to do is to basically explore what's causing it, why it's happening, how it's being transmitted, and how it's being sent to the general population. And we're going to explore that in our next video. So I do invite you to tune in and take a look at it, because hopefully it'll answer some of your questions.